So great, so thrilling to see so many of you here. We're going to give everyone just one more minute while I see that number going up so quickly. We just want you, but maybe I'll go through some technical details while we're doing this. I always love seeing in the chat where people are coming from. And so I see here, maybe, do I see the chat? Yes, I see the chat. So I see that we have people from North Carolina, Chile, New Jersey, Toronto, Rochester, Tucson, Arizona, where my husband's family is from. Victoria Lauren Miller says, we don't see you. I hope that's not true. You should be able to, well, the main image that you should see right now is our little launching Seeing Through Photographs message. But at the top, I hope that you can see, but anyway, don't worry if you can't see everyone. We will make sure that you see everyone when everyone's speaking. UK, Mill Valley from New York, Montreal, Argentina, Massachusetts, Ecuador, Chicago, Queens, Upper West Side, welcome. Milan, Italy, Washington, DC, yay. So anyway, thank you all. It's 5:33. We're gonna begin. There was one Seeing Through Photographs learner from New Zealand who was very sad that we were always doing these at noon because that made it very, very difficult for that time zone. So I hope that any of you who are from a time zone that isn't normally able to join us when we do this at noon is joining us now. Just a little reminder, when we do these webinars, we are recording this. So we just want you to know that your questions will be recorded, and we thank you for participating. Also, we have activated the chat function, which is really a way for you to talk amongst yourselves, but we've also activated the Q&A function. And if you don't want to ask a question, but you simply want to upvote somebody else's question, that's a good way of making us sure that we see it. I'm delighted to be joined today by the esteemed poet Tess Taylor, tuning in from El Cerrito, California. Tess, do you want to say a few words? Can you hear me? It's a tiny bit jumpy on your audio, Tess. I wonder if anyone else is having the same trouble hearing Tess. River or Tasha, are you having the same trouble?
Hi, it's River here. I'm also having trouble hearing Tess.
Can you hear me?
Now we can hear you, Tess. Okay, try one more time, Tess.
Well, hi. Let's try again.
Great.
Hi. Did that work? Is that good?
Yes, all good.
Okay. So let's just hope that it stays good. Here we are with the vicissitudes of bandwidth and the strangeness of place in this moment. I am in this neighborhood that Dorothea Lange photographed in the 1940s. And that is how I began to think about her. I moved back here. I grew up here. I moved back here. And then I was wandering around these neighborhoods thinking about how Dorothea Lange had seen them and photographed them. And that began this project which led me to Sarah and today to you. And originally we would have done this together in New York, but it's actually kind of amazing to be able to bring everyone together to have this conversation from wherever we are in the world.
I so agree. Thank you so much, Tess. And I'll point out to everyone that my colleague Sarah Bodenson in Education just put in the chat a link to Tess's website. So you can go there and sign up for her mailing list if you like, and learn all about the other ways in which Tess thinks about poetry as well as Lange that we'll talk more about today. So you heard River Bullock chime in very briefly there. River, you want to say just how you and I work together on this? Or?
Hi, yeah, I'm fortunate to be a curatorial fellow in the Department of Photography and had the pleasure of working with Sarah Meister on the exhibition Dorothea Lange Words and Pictures, which opened in February and is now dark, but will be open to folks soon.
And then many of you know my colleague, Tasha Lutek, who has been by my side for all of these Seeing Through Photographs study centers. Tasha, you want to just say, for those of you people who don't know you, a quick word about what you do?
Sure, yeah. Hello, hi everyone. I'm the collection specialist. I work very closely with Sarah and River and all of our colleagues in the Department of Photography. And I'm really focused on the collection and making sure it's properly cataloged and accessible, and that people can learn from it. So my role with Dorothea Lange was helping to organize the prints and catalog them, essentially.
And Tasha's being modest, but I'll say that for an artist like Dorothea Lange, when there were so many words and titles associated with her pictures over the course of her life, Tasha's the one who gives sort of like high level clarity and organization to this and how we think about it for the works in the collection. So thank you, Tasha, for all your work on that. Also with Jane Pierce, our colleague who made this picture here. So, so today we're going to talk about Lange, and specifically about Lange and poetry. You all know that the exhibition Dorothea Lange Words and Pictures takes different kinds of relationships between words and photographs as its organizing principle. And one of those kinds of relationships is between poetry and photography. So I thought what we'd do is begin with a poem that Archibald MacLeish published in 1938, where of the 80-something photographs in the book, MacLeish chose more than half were by Lange, including 9 out of the first 10. And MacLeish was very careful to write, "This is not a book of poetry illustrated by photographs. It is a book of photographs illustrated by a poem." And in doing that, he was really inverting the relationship between that one might have anticipated having between words and pictures. And I want to think about this through MacLeish, but then also very importantly through Tess's work in a moment, because there is also a really interesting dynamic in Tess's poetry between words and pictures. So River, can we go to the first slide? What I thought we'd do is also read through most of the first 10 pages of MacLeish's poem, because, and then you can look at the Lange photographs while we do that. I think in this moment that we're all experiencing, which is one where questions of words and language and racist thoughts and actions need to be deeply questioned and reconsidered, and our own roles in perpetuating and repeating these horrific practices needs to be examined critically. I think reading the uncertainty of the beginning of MacLeish's poems and the tentativeness, which with he's questioning how his words represent the American experience alongside Lange's photographs, is really a telling one. So we're going to take just a minute and read through the beginning of MacLeish's poem. So, we don't know. We aren't sure. For 150 years, we've been telling ourselves, we cut our brag in the bark of the big tree. Quote, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, that among them are life, liberty. We told ourselves we had liberty. We told ourselves the proposition was self-evident. We told ourselves the continent was poor in tameable animals. We told ourselves we were free because we were free. We were free because we were that kind. We were Americans. And then I'll skip ahead a little. We told ourselves, okay, now we don't know. It's okay. Now we don't know. We're wondering. And so that's the beginning of MacLeish's poem. And I'm going to just, because we're anchoring this in a little bit of a talk about Lange, I want to also remind you all that some of those photographs we saw accompanying MacLeish's poem appeared in other contexts in Lange's work and in the Words and Pictures show. So for instance, on the left, you see the page from McLeish's poem, and you notice that there's a sixth figure, a shorter man to the far right. And when this photograph was reproduced in An American Exodus, just 1 year later, which was a book that Lang and her husband Paul Taylor were responsible for making, it appeared with only those first 5 people, and the text that appears alongside of it, which is a little small there, so I hope you don't mind, I'm reading from my catalog where it is legible. It says, all displaced tenant farmers, the oldest 33, all Native Americans, none able to vote because of the Texas poll tax, all on WPA. They support an average of 4 persons each on $22.80 a month. And then there are quotes from each of these men. Where are we gonna go? How are we gonna get there? What are we gonna do? Who are we gonna fight? If we fight, what are we gonna whip? And she all transcribed these notes, as she writes, in North Texas on a Sunday morning in June 1937. So I'm gonna try to slow down a little and give us all a chance to reflect on McLeish's poem and on this idea of, so if anyone has questions about or comments that they'd like to make about the cropping, about the different words, and this includes River, Tess, Tasha, or any of our visitors, I welcome your thoughts. I don't know if I can even see the Q&A. Let's see. Oh. I should say, the Q&A is a good place. If you have a thought you'd like to share with the group, put it there. But if you don't, that's also great. River or Tess, I see you're unmuted. Do you want to share a few thoughts?
Well, no, I mean, one of the things that's so beautiful about Lang is watching this work move around into these different contexts. And I think that one of the things that is fascinating about her is she had, somewhere in her archive that I spent a lot of time with, an envelope full of snipped up bits of words that she had saved for possible captions. So, you know, here's these 2 contexts where you see her work changing in the cropping and also in the language that's next to it. And it's really interesting to realize that she was always kind of keeping a little bit like a rattle bag of language that she was kind of moving around, and she was thinking not only in photograph, but in collage or in photo plus text. And yeah, that's something I love about seeing these 2 things next to each other.
Me too. And I'll just mention to 2 of the cute questions. What if someone asked what happened to the man on the far right? And we don't know. Lang never addressed specifically why she and Taylor decided to crop him out. I have my own theories. I think River has slightly. Everyone is welcome. I am interested to hear other people's theories. I see that someone wrote maybe because he's wearing black clothes and he didn't sort of fit with the tonal range of the others. I think it's also that he may not have embodied the same degree of sort of virility, or that the taller, stronger looking men captured, but it is why she decided, maybe she just thought compositionally it was stronger if they were slightly bigger and larger in the frame, but we don't know. And to one other point about when McLeish was saying when Lang and Taylor were saying all Native Americans, what she meant by that is not Native American in the sense that we use it now. What she meant is that these were Americans who were born in America, so native to the United States as a collection of states, which is not the way we use that word now. But it is, yes, and as someone else noted, that by cropping off that figure, she also decided to crop off the roof and to sort of come in closer and let us read their expression. So it's an interesting thing to think about how cropping changes how words and cropping change our approach. And maybe River, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I'll just add to what Tess was saying about a sense of collage practice with language, and thinking about Lang's own cropping practices with her pictures. we're fortunate at the museum within the collection to have variants of multiple images and to get to see sort of how Lang returned to photographs and reframed and cropped them throughout her life, sometimes simply by like drawing a pencil line so that we can see an indicated cropping mark that, for instance, we use a window mat to then frame a new image. And this sort of revisitation of language and images is something that you see across Lang's career.
And one more thing I want to mention, there are some interesting comments about the tonal range, how cool or warm these pictures feel. And I think that if we were physically together in person, we could really dive into this, but in a shorthand way, which Tasha and we love to do. But in a shorthand way, I'll say there are several things that influence your approach to a photograph when it's printed in a book. One is the color of the ink that is used, and those inks can be cool toned or warm toned. Another, as you can also see clearly here, is the tone of the paper. So a cooler toned paper lends the picture a certain quality, a warmer toned paper lends another. Those can be chosen for aesthetic purposes, but they can also be chosen for very practical ones, like what was less expensive, what was available. And so that is, what do you think, Tasha?
Oh, I was going to chime in with another question just to clarify. Someone's asked if Lang was working for the FSA when she shot these.
Yes, in a nutshell, yes, she was. Lang worked more frequently than not for the Resettlement Administration, which became for the California state government, then for the Resettlement Administration, which became the Farm Security Administration for most of the 1935 to the early 1940s, when she then transitioned into other roles for other department agencies for a couple of years. So she was working for the government. And when she made this picture in particular, I do believe she was either working for the FSA, the Farm Security Administration, or its predecessor, the RA. No, by this time it was definitely FSA, sorry. So River, do you want to bring up the other example that we have of that? I really loved everyone's comments and questions about it. So here is the text that I read some of. On the left, that's Archibald MacLeish's text, along with a dramatically cropped version of Lang's photograph called Plantation Overseer and His Field Hands, plural, is how she normally titled it. On the right, you see the way a fuller crop from that same negative was reproduced in a book called 12 Million Black Voices, a folk history of the Negro in the United States by Richard Wright that came just a few years later in 1941. What you can't see, even in 12 Million Black Voices, is that on the far left, Paul Taylor is standing there interviewing the plantation overseer, almost distracting him and drawing his attention off to the side of the frame so that Lang can be looking directly at and helping us identify with the field hands. And for me, Lang was very upset with the way that this picture was cropped in 12 Million Black Voices. She felt it really skewed the story of the picture. I agree 100%. And the way in which it appeared in the Richard Wright book is a much more encompassing sense of the circumstance that Lang and Taylor happened upon. So I also I'm trying not to rush us too much, but I do also want to get to Tess. So I'm going to say, let's go to Tess. So here is just a little reminder. On the left is the Dorothea Lange Words and Pictures book, in which if you want to spend more time with all of these croppings, you may. But on the right is Tess's very wonderful, a little bit larger and more lovely than a chapbook, but in that spirit. Of course, I had to look up what a chapbook was when we started this project. But, the Last West Road Songs for Dorothea Lange. So Tess, do you want to, you talked a little bit about your connection with Lang, but maybe you want to talk a little bit specifically about how this book came together and your thoughts about what photographs we might choose to put in with it. And maybe River could go through a few of the photographs that appear in the book while you're talking so that people can sort of understand that.
Sure. So as I said, I grew up in a neighborhood that Lang photographed in the 1940s, and all around me are some of the scenes that are the kind of prehistory of my childhood in a way, the Richmond shipyards and the little bungalows of El Cerrito. And when I moved back here, I became obsessed with thinking about Lang and her legacy, her sort of grandmother figure as an artist in Berkeley, the legacy of what it was like to have, to drive out and do this work, and really wondering what she would think of, the Bay Area and California now. And, many of us who live here know that we are facing again a major crisis of shelterlessness. The tents are in Berkeley, Lang would go drive miles and miles and photograph the conditions of miners. We have tents right outside the BART station. So I just sort of knowing that she had this vision and that she had told these stories, I wanted to revisit her and think about her. And I didn't know exactly what that meant. So I went to the Oakland, the archive at the Oakland Museum of California and looked at her spreadsheets, but also found that there's this trove of the notebooks that she kept. She kept really amazing notebooks. She would drive all over the country, but really also all over the state of California, talking to people who were migrant or displaced one way or another. And the language in the photograph, the language in the notebooks really called to me. So, she had polio, she moved slowly. And one of the things that she would do is go and get people's permission really to spend time photographing them. And they would tell her something about their lives. And the language that she would record, she'd run, well, I guess she couldn't really run, but she'd go back to the car and she would write down things that people had said. And the texture of these notebooks began to call to me. So when I began to work with Sarah, my project was, I will go to the same places where Lang went in these notebooks, and I will also make some notes, and we will see what happens. And so Last West is what I call a collage poem. It collages Lang's notebooks with my own notes. It's amazing in this spring of staying put to remember that this time last year I was driving miles and miles and miles across California following Dorothea Lang's notes and calling Sarah and letting her know what I'd seen in the Imperial Valley or
A joy.
It was, yeah. So this photo, for instance, as we were, this thing was coming together, we began to think, well, what photos do we want in it? And how are the photos going to dance? Because it wasn't that the poems were for the photos exactly. It was more that I wanted to try that process. I wanted to just go with a notebook and follow those roads. I didn't even know what would happen. I didn't know if people would talk to me. She did this process for 15 years, from about 1932 to 1945, more or less. I mean, she was on the road a long time, and I just did this for a year. So I had this humility towards the notion that this wasn't the same thing, and yet there was something about the process I wanted to follow. Well, this picture that's up right now means a lot to me because this is the kind of bulletin board that you see in encampments around California. There's one called the Here There encampment that's on Ashby and Adeline. And it's a bunch of people who are sober and living in community and trying to figure out their next steps, but also just having the satisfaction of not lugging their stuff around all day. And sometimes it varies between 20 and 30 people. But one of their resources is their bulletin board. And it doesn't say that they're leaving for Oklahoma, but it does have resources of how to get to a doctor or, how to get medicine need be. And so this image, while it's dated in the 30s, felt like something that you would see today in certain places if you would go look.
And actually, Tess, can I interrupt for 1 second? And River, maybe we'll just go back and all look through. There's a selection of images that we've put up here for everyone to see that are pictures, a selection of pictures that Tess chose to put in her book. And one of the things, Tess, that you described to me was that you wanted to make sure that the photographs didn't seem too anchored in Lang's moment, that you wanted them to be able to resonate with what you were encountering today. And it taught me a new way of looking at Lang's work, about thinking about timelessness and Lang. And so maybe, if you don't mind, would you mind reading one of your collage poems for everyone to hear? And then we can look at these photographs. And also, just to be clear, one of the things I love about the book is that there isn't, unlike with McLeish, where there's a pairing of a photograph with a word or group of words. In your book, sort of along with this collage aesthetic of your poetry, the idea is that the photographs and the images kind of float as independent entities, as alternative anchors of, and so it is where Archibald MacLeish really needed to say explicitly, this is not a book of poetry illustrated by photographs, it is a book of photographs illustrated by a poem. What you're getting at is actually a much more complex and textured relationship between poetry. So I just want people to understand that as you're reading a poem, it is meant to evoke these and other photographs and your notes and Lang's notes. And so it is not meant to have a sort of direct one-to-one connection. So I just, you know, for people who might be less familiar with it, I thought that might be helpful.
Sure, I'll read the opening poem
Great.
of the book, and that is paired with a picture of the Model T in a sort of gully. The Imperial Valley stretches of it look a lot like this now. In fact, I walked along a stretch of border that is very much like this without the Model T, but with lots of traffic and traces in it. And so the poem that I'm going to read is called Imperial Valley 1935 and More. And it gives you a sense of her notebook. In fact, most of the poem is composed of her notebook fragments. And then there's one newspaper headline from last year. Imperial Valley 1935 and More. Road songs, her 1935 notebook, Coachella, Calipatria, Neyland, Hopeville, Calexico, El Centro, Brawley, back up 99, Edison, Tulare, Turlock, Modesto, Wesley, La Loma, Marysville. Her scrawl, date palms near Mecca, a desert method. 1935 single man, you can't find any decent place unless you pay good money. What difference, what country, what state, what agency? Question, what does it mean to photograph home? 1935, families of squatters along a side road. All have house cars, get water at service stations, crops, lettuces, melons, carrots, peas, cantaloupe, potatoes, apricots, peaches, berries, alfalfa, beans, cherries, sugar beets. Man, how are you going to get by on just $2 a day? Cotton, 3 men, 20 cents, half a row, $2 a day. Potatoes, no better. Man, wife, and kid, onions, $1.60. Hay job, 25 cents an hour. Imperial Valley, more refugees outside. 1937, man, if we had anything to go back for. 1937, Skid Row, this also is California. 2019, today's paper, climate change affecting the coffee groves of Honduras. 1937, man, I wouldn't undertake to farm this land no more. Abandoned houses, abandoned soil, the government camp, the trading center, Main Street in Marysville, cabin for rent. Graflax #1, note to self, get wide angle lens.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tess. And that note to self, get wide angle lens. You know, Lang really did in her practice come closer. I would say so the thought of her making a note that sometimes in order to capture a certain something, she needed to be able to bring in more of it, as she did in this photograph. I loved the way you ended that poem with that little anchor to her. There are two questions that came in that I just want to pause to address, because for those of you who may have missed like opening, beginning, yes, this is about the Lang Words and Photographs exhibition that's at MoMA. We are hoping to be able to reopen safely, perhaps as early as by the end of the summer, but we really aren't. We're following all state and local guidelines, and this really has to do with protecting staff, has to do with protecting you all who are able to come. So we hope that when we reopen, the Lang exhibition will still be on view. It's in completely dark galleries waiting so that it is able to be on view. And then the other question, oops, sorry, I missed it. Tasha, did you see that one? It was just sort of about.
It was just asking for more background information on Lang.
Okay, so actually, my apologies. I didn't give any background information on Lang. Thank you. So just in a brief nutshell, Lang was a photographer, I would say, of the human condition, who was actually stranded in the Bay Area in the late teens when she was pickpocketed. She and a friend had been planning on traveling around the world. She operated a very successful commercial private photo studio in San Francisco for much of the 1920s. And in 1933, early 1933, she felt she could no longer avoid looking clearly at the impact of the Great Depression on the people around her. And for the first time, she took her camera out of her studio and down into the street. And she, apocryphally at least, made the photograph White Angel Breadline, which really is a picture that marked the beginning of what I consider to be Lang's mature career. That idea of engaging through through looking at many different slices of American life with a very authentic curiosity, with a commitment to seeing what she could do with her camera to draw attention to those less fortunate. She later in her life used this same sense of empathy, photographing her own family in a way that I think underscores her belief in, again, this in what makes us all human. And so she has been the subject. She died in 1965, in October of 65, of cancer. Her major retrospective opened at MoMA in January of 1966. And so what's on view now at MoMA is a rethinking of what could a retrospective look like in our contemporary moment. What aspects of Lang's career had we not studied, but all of the work in the exhibition. Oh, maybe we could scroll forward to a little bit of the installation view and then get to Tess's too. The work in the exhibition is all from the museum collection. That print you see there of the man with his hand raised like this, that was in the 1966 retrospective. But you also see, well, you can't really see White Angel Breadline, but it's right behind that glass door. But you do see some early magazines. The first two times that her work was published with words, we have those two magazines in 1934, both there. So this gives you a little bit of a sense. And one of the things, we're so lucky that we have Tess here, because if you were standing at MoMA right now in front of this photograph, you would be able to poke in the number on your audio guide. And fortunately, you can actually do that even from the comfort of your home. But Tess's voice is the first voice that you hear when you walk into the exhibition. And we thought very carefully about how to bring people's experience of words and pictures into the gallery. So also what you can't see very well there through the glass on the left is a quote by Lang. We wanted to have Lang's voice represented throughout the exhibition. So there are 3 type silkscreen quotes like that. As I mentioned, we wanted to have the magazine so you could see the contexts in which these works circulated. But on the far right there, what you might see is an enlarged wallpaper from the end papers of her 1939 book, An American Exodus. And this is what Tess was talking about in that opening part of the audio guide. And Tess, maybe you'll talk a little bit about what struck you about this end paper and what it meant.
Well, so I also got a chance to see a copy of American Exodus in the archives, and I could see from her practice that she was sort of stylizing these notes, and that part of her goal was not just to see, but to listen. And that she had an amazing ear for language, that every one of these quotes is a microhistory that will haunt you. You know, I wouldn't undertake to farm this land no more. There's another famous one that says, this country is a hard country. When you die, you're dead, that's all. And, you know, someone said that, and she wrote it down in her notebook, and it calls to us across time. And there's a very particular American vernacular that she hears. She also, this is not in these end papers, had this love of making lists and also just writing down the very basic things about how much money people were taking in and how much money they were spending, and kind of trying to make sure that that actually made sense, which for a lot of people it didn't. And, you know, for a lot of people, arguably it doesn't right now, in terms of just having, you know, does what you take in equal what you have to put out just to get by in this world? And she had a real fascination with the sort of the poetry of getting by. And that really struck me. And these quotes are full of that too. This life is simplicity boiled down.
And can I just say, I would love for people, maybe Sarah Bodenson could put in the Q&A or in the chat, both the links to Tess's audio guide stops, which you can access directly. And also there's a little intro video on the exhibition page that you can also look at, that our colleague Tasha worked on, that for the first time, she actually hired actors to read these voices, because it isn't, Tess was the one who pointed this out to me, in fact, that ability to capture a vernacular, a way of speaking that is specific and accurate, that you can, when you read it, you can hear it, is actually really, really hard to do. And I started reading other examples that made my skin crawl, and it made me realize how, and so in that little intro video, you can hear these sort of overlapping voices from An American Exodus, and it brings it to life in a really nice way. But Tess, also on the audio guide, you spoke about another photograph that I was wondering if you could talk about with this group here as well. Either this one, I'll give you a choice. Everybody can vote.
On the road to Los.
You spoke about both of these, so either one.
Right. So
Look, hold on. Sorry, it was just a quick glitch. You're good.
We all do our best. This one I love because it is a picture of American paradox. And there is a sense in this picture of what we aspire to be, or maybe what we're being sold that we will be, and where we are. And this sense that Lang really had an eye for the paradox. And this feels like iconic Lang to me, because there is a kind of this conflict, but also I love the way there's language in it, a billboard. And later, this road may or may not be Route 99, which is a kind of, well, she about Route 99 through California, she said, the splendor and the rest of it, which pretty much captures it. It's kind of both beautiful and really farm industrial. And it's an intense road. There's a lot of accidents on it. It's, anyway, I did a drive down Route 99 and also did a poem where I put lots of billboards in because I love the language. Private train, relax. Next time. We'll do it. We'll do our best, man. So.
Right. I mean, the irony of this one, because of course, as if these two, as Tess opened with, she's like, this just embodies the American paradox. Here are these two men as if taking a train, they're carrying everything they own on their back, as if taking a train was remotely an option for them. But it really, you nailed it. So, and this too, Tess, I loved your observations about it.
So Richmond, California is an endpoint on the Great Migration, and people came here for jobs in the shipyards. The shipyards were one of the first desegregated workplaces in the US in the 40s. It was very tense, actually, because people came together, white and black, out of the South and worked together in a factory during wartime without the benefit of the civil rights movement. And certainly we can see that the fault lines in our country remain unhealed, even despite our best efforts of 70 years or, whatever efforts we have made. Anyway, this woman is looking happy, and she is at the Richmond Cafe, and she is just in the sun having a slice of the California dream or the American dream. And I love it because I know this neighborhood, I know this light. I don't know if that cafe still exists, but I just love that so many of Lang's pictures are of people that are on the move or displaced or who don't have autonomy in one way or another or are being displaced. And this woman is where she is and she's happy. And I love that we get to have it.
River, do you want to talk a little bit about some other words that have been associated with this picture, or do you have other thoughts that you might want to share? If I can put you on the spot, you have to unmute yourself, but.
Sure, I'll just say a couple things. This photograph was included in a story that Lang and Ansel Adams collaborated on for Fortune magazine. And the reporting in that story sort of accounts for the working conditions at this moment, much as Tess was just also noting. I think it's, one of the really interesting things about language and photographs is that they can function as a sort of time travel across historical circumstance. And in so much of Lang's work, we find that there's such resonance between her historical moment and our current condition, be that in terms of labor politics, in terms of migration, in terms of the different structures of power, in terms of race in the US. And so I know that for me, her images are, ones that I come back to again and again. And I think incorporating contemporary voices was such an important part of this project precisely for that reason. So Tess being one of them, another being Christina Sharp, who wrote about this photograph, and her text is featured in the catalog. And really to take a moment and appreciate this as a moment of Black joy is something that comes up also in Christina's text, as Tess noted. So those are some things that come to mind.
And thank you, River. That was beautiful. I also, Norman Roth asked, is she in the I Am an American exhibit? And by that, I think he means the exhibition about of Japanese internment during World War II, if I'm not mistaken. And I thought maybe, River, since that's hanging on the same wall as this, do you want to talk a little bit about, we don't have a slide for it, but I think it's worth thinking a little bit about all of her activities during World War II. This was one of them, and the shipyard, you know, her looking at.
Certainly. Yeah, so.
Also, Tess wants to say something. Tess, you can go first.
Yeah, Tess, jump in, go ahead.
We can all be unmuted too. We can chat, you know. Whoop, Tess, you just remuted yourself by accident.
I wanted to talk a little bit about that, about this moment, 1942, which is the moment that she was photographing this neighborhood that I grew up in. And literally in her journals, week by week, speaking of American paradox, she's photographing this incredible thing of a desegregated workplace, filling with people out of the South who are working together. And the photos of that moment are so beautiful. The Richmond Shipyards photos, the light, this particular photo is one of them. The population of Richmond went from 20,000 to 120,000 in the year 1941. And that just tells you everything. It was change, change, change. So she's photographing that week by week, and in between photographing this moment of some kind, some hopeful American triumph, in the same neighborhood, in the same place, she's photographing Japanese internment. And so she's watching people be taken out of their homes, sent away. She's watching their baggage be put on the front lawn.
All right.
This is like a beautiful sound piece, but we lost Tess's.
Right. Tess, your audio. Yeah, I think what you're saying is she's watching their baggage be taken away, but also treated and labeled as baggage.
Front, I am an American.
But,
oh my goodness, the worst.
I will. I'm right there with you. It happened. It's probably my fault just for being on the call. I have severe tech problems. But you were saying with their baggage, Tess, it sort of started to get slow after that.
Right. So at the moment that she's watching this dream of a desegregated workplace and something hopeful happen in America for the first time, really, she's also watching people be displaced. And to talk about American paradox and seeing the whole story at once, she's seeing both things happen at the same time in the same neighborhood and week by week photographing them. I would love to interview Dorothea Lange in 1942 and hear what she would have to say to us. That would be a joy.
Yeah, I agree. River, do you have thoughts about this section, or Tasha that you want to chime in? No. I will say, or River, sorry, I let you.
Sure, yeah. I mean, there's lots of things to be said here. And I know we just have a few minutes left together. But I think, you know, Tess nailed it on the head.
I should say, sorry, before River talks, while River is speaking, think of questions that you might want to ask. Ask Tess about her poetry, ask Tasha about the prints, ask River about the project, ask me about any, you know, all of us are here. We love your questions.
I mean, I guess one thing that comes to mind while we have Tess here, maybe to just pose my own question with this moment in mind, is really thinking about your own practice as a poet and this this sort of collaboration in a way with Lange as you worked on the project. And I guess I'm just wondering, you know, Lange is such an inspiring figure for so many reasons to so many people, and I keep wondering how our engagement with her changes our own practice and our own actions in our current moment. And so I guess I would love to hear how this project changed you or changed your own poetic practice. Not to put you on the spot, but.
That's a really big question. And I don't know, I can't say exactly what the future holds. I mean, if you had told me that when I wrote this book, it would launch into a pandemic, I mean, the world is so full of surprises. One of the amazing surprises is that after 3 months of lockdown, people wanted to spend 10 days marching in the streets for justice. And that was an amazing and beautiful American surprise. So I will say that when I would go places, and I'm talking about small towns on the border, I'm talking about homeless shelters, I'm talking about Manzanar, the Japanese internment camp. When I would talk to people about why I was there and what I was interested in, when I would mention Dorothea Lange, they would soften and they wanted to give me a little more time. But I also seemed to feel that they would give me a little more heart. And I did not deserve that of myself. I mean, I'd like to think I'm a nice and good person, but really there was something that her steadiness of witness represents to people across the American spectrum, you know, from a border town to a homeless encampment to an American museum of detention, that what provoked their generosity, and that humbled me. I felt it very profoundly that to go somehow with her, channeling her and asking on her behalf was an important gesture. And so, yeah, it's very meaningful to me to think of that now.
We, at MoMA, we called it sort of For the Love of Lange became our kind of mantra. And it was, everybody felt it, from the painters who were prepping, you know, to the graphic design team, to the guards in the galleries. It was like, we were all, to the art handlers who hung the pictures on the walls, everybody, to all the wonderful contributors like you, Tess. It was like, I had never worked on a project where every invitation we sent out was met with a positive response. And as that had never happened previously, I know for a fact that doesn't have to do with me, that has to do with Lange. And her commitment to bearing witness, and what that sense of responsibility invites from each of us today, I think is really inspiring. So I want to conclude, before we conclude, by asking Tess to read one more poem, because I feel as if reading a little, ending, it was Tess's idea, and I think it's a brilliant one, to end on a poem. But I just want to go through some of the really great questions that came in, and at least try to answer them briefly live. So the first question, Tess, is for you. Did you take photographs while you followed Lange's roots through California? I know the answer, but I'm not going to give it away.
I have never thought of myself as a photographer, and I just didn't do that. So I wish I had, because I think they would have been useful, but my photographs are of like there's like a dusty Imperial Valley sign covered in dust. I did take a picture of wind. But I think of my writing practice as very visual. It's full of, I feel like sometimes my poems just string image upon image. So the way that I sort of hear the image, if that makes any sense, I hear the image in language. That's how I know I am happy, like my brain is clicking along, describing everything.
That's great, thank you. Okay.
Also a question about,
yeah.
She wrote Madonna, I assume she means migrant mother, and about if you were familiar with that image or had encountered that. And I was thinking about and then I guess New York Times article where you asked someone where that image was taken, and the response was, people come by all the time, and continue to ask that. So I wanted to know if you had any other thoughts on how that image in particular.
Yeah, if someone could get there's a New York Times article that I wrote about the process that we could get into the chat. If anyone is Googling, I'm not going to do this myself because I'm talking and I'll watch it. But you can also just Google Tess Taylor, Dorothea Lange, and there it is in the New York Times. I went to Nipomo where she photographed Migrant Mother, and there is this kind of memory of her there. And yet, of course, a lot of paradoxes. And the poem really sort of describes what it's like to go to Nipomo now. And there's a feeling of her presence having been there, and people sort of circle it, and then nobody seems to quite remember where she took the famous shot. There's all of this kind of pointing in different directions. And the school is called the Dorothea Lange Elementary School. And then I went in and said, do you study her? And they said, we don't study her. So that was, you know, interesting.
Tasha, do you want to answer the question, Elsa's questions about did Lange print her photographs herself? You know those prints well?
Yeah. So there's several people who printed her work. The bulk of MoMA's collection is printed by Irwin Welcher. And one of the things that we spend a lot of time doing actually is trying to decipher who printed what work and what characteristics we can tell. Like if a certain printer is a little bit darker or shows the full negative or something like that. So in some cases we don't know. In some cases we have the gift of a Library of Congress stamp or FSA stamp, and we know that it was printed through them. And sometimes we don't know and we're just making a guess and just trying to see what the objects can tell us by comparing them and doing like a very extensive review.
Very good at giving us enough information that we can make a fairly informed guess. So thank you. And so I'm going to ask River one quick question, and then we'll go to let Tess wrap us up with a poem. Philip Schwartz asked to River, are you related to Win Bullock? And he likes your 18% gray background.
Thank you on both accounts. No, I'm in no relation to Win Bullock, but much respect.
Spirit animal. And yes, I also like your 18% gray background, where we've all found ourselves. Yikes. All right, Tess, so we're almost out of time, but I would love for you to follow up with your suggestion about ending with a poem. And Joseph Chiara wrote about comparing Lange and Sally Mann, to which Paul Hester wrote a super thoughtful response. So I'm going to let, for those who are curious, I would read that. And we will save and preserve all these things on Seeing Through Photographs, so you can access them and think about the questions later. So thank you all for, well, I'll say thanks at the end. First, let Tess read.
Thank you all for coming. It's interesting to remember that Richard Wright was also part of the Federal Writers Project. And as we talk about these forms of New Deal, I just always want to just hold up a hand and remember that part of the original New Deal was with cultural producers and artists as a fundamental cornerstone, and our beautiful post offices and statues all over the country, and Richard Wright himself, his amazing work, and Lange, and the things that that effort left us as part of our cultural treasury. So this poem that I'm going to end with is it's called Note to Self, and it's really just comprised of all the different notes to self that Dorothea Lange left in her notebooks that I read. Note to self. Possible title to hold this soil. Note to self, general theme of book, people left stranded by the outwash of industry in America. Note to self, US 99, the splendor and the rest of it. Note young trees. Note poor man's canyon, a subject on the move. Note to self, really do the work, follow the whole travel, destination unknown. 1, the method. 2, this still blank, a book on the conditions of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tess. What a great way to end a book and a Seeing Through Photograph Study Center session. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you to our wonderful AV team and all of our wonderful education colleagues behind the scenes. We really appreciate all you do to make these a success. And for those of you who are able to join us tomorrow, we're doing a joint venture with Modern Poetry. Who knows what that will look like? But at 11 a.m., we would welcome you all to join us for a very different but we hope equally interesting way of thinking about poetry and photography. So thank you all. And mainly, I know River and Tasha join me in thanking Tess. It is an honor to have had you with us. And your book, I keep it, you know, by my bed when I need a little grounding and inspiration both. So thank you.
Much appreciation for the work, Tess.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, stay strong, everyone. I'm really glad to have joined you.
Thank you, Tess.
Thank you.